So then tell me the difference. It seems like Rava and Reb Zera were able to do it.
I hear you.
He says, okay, it seems like you have what to say. So go ahead. Tell me why. I told him. He enjoyed it.
Okay, gewaltig. It's a geschmack of shot indeed. Okay, so let's see the Heilige Gemara. We are Amar Shlokish Amar on the second line. So before we begin, I just want to say that I'm making a tefillah. The Rebbeinu Shalom should have a chamanis on all our sick people amongst us. We should send them a refuah shalom in the chus of our learning. That we throw Moshe ben Yantegittel and Shimon Yehuda ben Rivka and Yaakov Shmuel and Chana and Shimon ben Chassia and all those who need refuahs. I also want to mention that today, I mentioned last night, is the Yortzeit of Ramachal, but today is also the Yortzeit of a big tzaddik who was near and dear to me, Reb Chaim Brim Zatzal. Reb Chaim Brim was a Talmud of Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, and he's a Talmud of the Chazon Ish, and he was a very, very Hashabi who lived right off the Shtiblach in Meir Sharm. And I was fortunate enough to have a Charusashaft with him when I was in Eretz Yisrael. It was sort of forced upon him because I came to his house and I said, I refuse to leave your house until you promise me that you're going to learn with me. And he said, okay, no problem, don't leave my house. And he just ignored me. And after about an hour, his wife said, Chaim, warftem mishigen aros von inzer Stib. And I said, I'm not leaving until you promise you're going to learn with me. So he actually used to learn with me once a week. He was an Adon Choshev. And I remember every Erev Chodesh used to go to the Beis Forest to daven by his parents, by his in-laws, and he would always come back and say to his wife, Rebbetzin, I saw your father this morning. He really looks good. So he had a sense of humor. He was a holy Yid. He was an Adam Choshev Admoid. Bavram Chaim, I don't remember his father's name. It was Chusay Yagn Aleinu. He was a very big tzaddik. He was Yeshiva Square in America for a couple of years. And many years after that, he had a beautiful voice. He used to daven for the Amr Square. And he was very much Shomer Seinov. They say that from the time he got into Monit in Meir Sharm till when he got out of the taxi or the car that he was picked up in Square, he wouldn't open his eyes. That's how ugly he was. He was a very geschmacke, normal Yid, and he was a holy man. And there's a legend about him with this Villa Rebbe that during the I believe it was during the War of Independence in the 1948 war, his wife was deathly ill. She was a very young woman. They were in their young 20s, maybe their teens, and she was deathly ill. And there were bombs flying all around the streets because they were in the middle of a war. They were being attacked. And he ran to this Villa Rebbe. He found out which shelter this Villa Rebbe was hiding in. And he went to this Villa Rebbe and he begged him for a bracha. So this Villa Rebbe said, the only thing I can do for you is I can tell you to go around and ask women to donate years of their life to your wife. And you could tell them, and he wrote it on a piece of paper, that whoever will donate a year of their life to Mrs. Brim, I guarantee them they will survive this war. You have to understand, at that time, there were literally bombs bursting all around. People didn't know if they were going to be alive in a minute. So that haftacha from this Villa Rebbe carried a lot of weight. And within minutes, he had 50 women signed up. And I believe they gave him a maximum of 50. I think there was a maximum amount of years that this Villa Rebbe said you could take. When he hit that, he stopped. And Kachavish, she lived exactly, I believe it was 50 years later. And I believe they even have that paper. That paper is still in existence. It's a Moedic story. And this Villa Rebbe, who made this big moifis, after the War of Independence, they lost Har Zaytim. So imagine they didn't have a basic forest. Every country needs to have a place to bury their dead. They didn't have it until they developed. Har Menuchas took 5 years. So they literally took every empty lot and they made it into a basic forest. So there's a small lot that's right near the Knesset building or maybe the Supreme Court building. And it's a lot there. There's a little basic forest there. And that's where this Villa Rebbe is buried. In the last 10 years, people discovered what a Poel Yeshua is. This Villa Rebbe is now already, people go there, they cleaned it up. But there's a lot of these little basic forests, nooks and crannies in Yerushalayim that were used because they had no basic forest. Okay, so let's see the Gemara weiter. So far, we had two different limudim to teach us that there's tashlumin for the carbon of Shavuos. We had the first limud where we learned it from the Hekesh of Chag HaMatzos. Just like Chag HaMatzos, you have tashlumin of Shiva. So to Shavuos, you have tashlumin of Shiva. Then we had the second limud. We had the second limud from Rebbeinu ben Yaakov, Rebbeinu ben Yaakov, that brings right from the pasuk that says Ukarasam, which is the pasuk of Shavuos, and the next pasuk is Uktzartem, which is talking about Matnas and Niyim. But since it says the Tzira right after the Kriya, we say that it's a Yom Tif where you're allowed to do Tzira. Of course, you can't do Tzira directly on Yom Tif. You could only do Tzira right after Yom Tif, and vice versa. That's part of the Yom Tif because you're allowed to have Tashlum. That brings us to where we're up to now. Reish Lakish Omer. Reish Lakish said, the Chag HaKotzir. It says in the pasuk the Chag HaKotzir. Let's see the pasuk. It says the Chag HaKotzir Bikurei Ma'asecha. Clearly, we're talking about Shavuos. Asher Tishra B'Asada. And the Chag HaOsif is referring to Sukkot. It says Hashana, Ba'asbecha es Ma'asecha Nasad. So let's see what it says over here. The Chag HaKotzir. Ezo Chag, which is the Yom Tif, Shat HaChagig the Koitzer Boy. That Sai, you put out the Yom Tif, and Sai, you cut. You could do Ksira, you could do harvesting. Haba Omer is Atzeres, that must be Shuas. So once again, the same analysis as we had before. Amos, when exactly could you do Ksira on Yom Tif? Ilema b'Yom Tif, if you're referring to Yom Tif itself, Ksira b'Yom Tif Mishari, you're not allowed to harvest on Yom Tif. Ela lav l'tashlumin. It must be referring to the tashlumin of the carbon can be done the days after Shavuos, and those days you're allowed to do harvest. So it's another raya that you could be mashed from the carbon after Shavuos. You would still need the first, the drasha of Rabbi Ishia to tell us that it's 7 days. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Zok Rabbi Yochanan, Elamayata, if that's how you're going to learn, so Chag HaOsif, at the end of the pasuk it says, Chag HaOsif, B'teis Hashana b'aspecha es ma'asecha min asada. So are you going to say the same thing? Ezeu Chag sheyesh b'yasifa. Which Yom Tif do you gather in your pairs? Hav Omer, I would argue, Zeh Chag HaSukkos. That is the Yom Tif of Sukkos. Well, Amos, exactly when on Sukkos are you doing this asifa? If it's on Yom Tif itself, Melacha b'Yom Tif Mishari, is one allowed to do Melacha on Yom Tif? Ella b'Chayla Shomoyed. It must be referring to Chayla Shomoyed. But for Gemara, Chayla Shomoyed Mishari, is one allowed to do Melacha on Chayla Moed? Avadana. Ella Chag Haba Bizman Asifa. What does it mean? It doesn't mean that you're actually doing a sifa on the Yom Tov. It means that the chag that occurs in the season of a sifa. Once I say that, then I can say by Shavuos as well, Hachanami chag haba bizman katira. So that neutralizes the whole drasha. Because it says the chag HaKotzir doesn't prove anything. Because it doesn't mean you can make tzira on the Yom Tov itself, which would indicate that there's a time after shlumin, which we equate with the Yom Tov, and then katsira is allowed. It just means that Shavuos comes in the season when Katsira is done. So you have no proof at all that the Yom Tov extends and that there's an extra time to be Mashal B'Karv. But whatever the case is, everybody seems to agree here, Mechlal de Tarvayu Svir Lahu, the Chayl Shomoyed Osir Basiyas Malacha. It seems like everybody agrees that Chalamoid is Osir B'Malacha. And Rashi says, Mitik Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Asifa, the Chayl Shomoyed, Mishari. Rabbi Yochanan asked the question. Does anybody allow Malacha Chayil Shemoyed? No one said back. Well, Mahadil Rish Lakish in Rish Lakish didn't say you're allowed to do Malacha Chayil Shemoyed. Machalal the Tarvayus Filu also. So Sire B'Yom Rish Lakish, everyone seems to agree that it's Osir. Now, from the nusach of our Gemara that we just learned, that we're talking about Psukim over here, and we're talking about Isha Malacha and Chayil Shemoyed, we're talking about deraises. So from this Gemara, it's very strongly mashma that the Isser to do Malacha on Chalamoid is an Isser deraisa. But in fact, at the beginning of Maseches Moed Katan, we actually learned that it's a three-way machlokes in the Rishonim, whether or not Malacha on Chalamoid is Asher Midarbanan or Midaraisa. And there's a third version, the Rabban, which is a hybrid. So if it's a deraisa, we learned it out of Psukim over there. It spoke about Shabbos, it spoke about Chag HaPesach, Chag HaMatzos. So the first day of Chag HaMatzos is Mekar and the last day is Mekar and the Shisha Yom Mekar. So we learned that there's Kedusha on all the days of Chalamoid, but not the same level as Isser as they are in Yom Tov, and that's how we learned it from. So that would indicate that it's a deraisa. Problem is, if it's a deraisa, how is it that the Rabbanan could say that for Dov Ovid it's allowed, for other things it's allowed? How is that possible? If it's deraisa, it's also across the board. So I believe the Toysus over there told us a huge chiddush. This is a unique halacha. There's others, but very few. That the Torah gave us general guidelines and didn't give specific guidelines, because the Torah told us about Chalamoid that it has kedusha, but it doesn't have the same kedusha as Yom Tov. That's the general guideline that the Torah gave us. Now, how exactly to manifest that the Torah gave over to the Chachamim to decide what's mutar midaraisa and what's osur midaraisa, and they established that a davar ovid would be mutar midaraisa. There's another shita that learns in the Rishonim that it's only midar abanan, and it's all on the smachta ba'alma. So then it makes perfect sense why the Rabbanan could decide what's osur and what's not. And then there's a harbi shita, which is Rambam, who holds that basic malacha is osur midar abanan midaraisa, except for a davar ovid, which is mutar midaraisa. That's midaraisa, and the Rabbanan is tirach yisera. Anything that's a tirach yisera is only initial midrabanan, and that's when when we learned it, it discussed many different halachas, and it all was dependent upon how much tircha there was, because that part of it is midrabanan. But the pashtus of our Gemara seems to indicate that it's deraisa, and if you learn that it's derabanan, you would learn it's derabanan, but it has a remez midaraisa, and that's why we have this truth. But I'll call upon them. The Gemara says that clearly from Rabbi Yochanan and from Rish Lakish, we see that they both hold that malacha is asher and chalamoid. How do we know? Where is the makar that malacha is asher and chalamoid? It's on Rabbanan. It's chag hamatois tishma shivas yom. The pasuk says chag hamatois, you have to watch 7 days. Lima, it teaches us al choylel shalmoid she'asher basis malacha. Shivas yom means all 7 days, including chalamoid. It'll be asher basis malacha. Divrei Rabbi Yoshia. Rabbi Yoshia ain't a tzarech. I don't need a pasuk to teach me that malacha is asher chalamoid. I have a kal v'chomer. Umar rishon yishvi. Madich the first day of Pesach and the last day of Pesach. She'ein kedusha lefnei mulacharayim. There's no kedusha before the first day of Pesach, and there's no kedusha after the last day of Pesach. Nevertheless, asher b'sis malacha. You're still not allowed to do malacha on the first and the last day of Pesach. Choylo shalmoyit, which is surrounded by kedusha. So yes, kedusha lefneim ula acharayim ein adinchi hey asher b'sis malacha. Surely they should be asher b'sis malacha. So we need to stop right over here. Isn't there a halacha ein masir min adin? Don't we have a halacha that there's no such thing as having a lav from a kal v'chomer? So the Torah Evan asked this kasha. The Torah Evan says we already have a pasuk that says that all the days are mikrai kodesh, and we're going to see that very shortly. We already have an assay that tells us that the days of Chalamoid, all the days of Yom Tov, are mikrai kodesh. The kal v'chomer is just to add the chomer of a lav to it. Zok Torah Evan. When do you say ein masir min adin? That's only if there is no assay. But if there's already an assay to prohibit malacha, then yes, masir min adin. However, the Rishonim say that even if you hold masir min adin, that there's a lav from a kal v'chomer, you wouldn't get malchus for doing malacha and chalamoid because ein oinshim min adin, even if there's a mitzvah assay to back it up. Zok Gemara. Your kal v'chomer is not a good kal v'chomer. What was your whole kal v'chomer? That since the chalamoid, it's kaddish the day before, and it's kaddish the day after, it's logical, it's a kal v'chomer that the days in between should be kaddish. Every week you have the same problem. Every week you have a problem. The Shabbos before the week, and the Shabbos after the week. Nevertheless, all week long, umutarin ba'asiyas malacha. So therefore, don't bring me a raya from the fact that Pesach has a yom of kedusha before and a yom of Isra Sis Malach after, that all the days in between cannot do malacha, because in every week we wouldn't be able to do malacha. So that's not a kasha. Mal sheishes shemei bereshis shein ben karban musaf. Sheishes shemei bereshis have no shayches to kedusha to Isra Malacha because they don't even bring a carbon. But on Chalamoid you bring a carbon musaf. So you see it has more shayches than the yom tov. Tamer v'chaylo shalmoid sheyesh boy carbon musaf. Gemara, a carbon musaf is not a reason to make an Isra Malacha, because Rish Chodesh will prove that to you. Sheyesh boy carbon musaf. Rish Chodesh has a carbon musaf. Umutar b'asiyas malacha, and you're still allowed to do malacha, Toimar b'chayil shamoy. So when you say b'chayil shamoy, shekari mikra kodesh, which is called mikra kodesh, there would be a reason to say it's awesome. The kari mikra kodesh, since it's called mikra kodesh, which Rosh Chodesh does not have. So since Cholamoid is called mikra kodesh A, and B, it's surrounded by days of kedusha, the first day and the last day. You knew she'aser b'asiyas malacha. So this is the makar that on Cholamoid it's also b'malacha is because you have a svara, since there's a day of Isser Malacha on the first day of Pesach, and there's a day of Isser Malacha on the last day of Pesach. It's logical to say that in between is Aser because side they bring a carbon musaf and side they're called Mikrai Kodesh. So we just need to iron out a couple of small details. Where do you see an Isser Malacha by Pesach? The Rashi tells us because it says it's Chag Hamatzos Tishmar Shiva Shah. Rashi tells us the word Tishmar is a lav. So if you look at Rashi all the way up over here, it says the Rosh Beis Chag Hamatzos Tishmar, the Chol Tishmar, and every time it says a lashon of Tishmar in the Torah, as Horace Loisasahu, it means that it's a loisasa. Shem Reimun Amalacha, watch it from the Malacha. Earlier we said that Chalamoid is called Mekroy Kodesh. That's what the Gemara says here at the end. The Kar Mekroy Kodesh, which Rashi says Mashma Kacheyu Basis Malacha. The Mekroy Kodesh, with which the Torah refers to, Chalamoid, tells us that it's going to be also b'malacha. So that is our makar, that it's also b'malacha. But the Gemara brings another makar. Tanya Yidach. We had another brayso that discusses this shaila. Al chayla shamoid, kol malachas avoda loisasi. One may not do a malacha. Limit, it teaches us al chayla. So let's see where this pasuk is. Let's see the full pasuk. Here it's Gimel in my Torah Ar Shalom. It says Bayom Harishon Mikra Kodesh kol malachas avoda loisasu. Shivas Yamim Takruva Ishal Hashem. So this is not speaking about Pesach. Now we've shifted into a pasuk that talks about Sukkot, and then it says B'Yom Hashmini Mikra Kodesh Yilachem V'Kraftim Ishal Hashem Atzeresi Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu. So the Gemara darshans this pasuk by Sukkot. Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu, which is completely extra, because if you look in the pasuk again, it already says B'Yom Rishon Mikra Kodesh Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu. And then it says Shiva Shem Takruva, and then B'Yashini Yelachem V'Graftim Shalem. And then it says again Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu. Here it's extra because it already said it at the beginning. So Zok the Gemara. Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu limed al Chayla Shalmoid she'asher b'asiyas malacha divrei Rabbi Yosy Aglili. This teaches us that you're not allowed to do malacha on Chalamoid. So let's see Rashi over here. Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu. So I made a mistake. I said that the second kol malachas avoda loisasu is extra, but that's not what Rashi says. Rashi says from the second kol malachas avoda loisasu, it says right after that shivas yom takrivu. So let's look back again. I was wrong again. It's from the first kol malachas avoda loisasu. So the pasuk says we have a rishon mikol kodesh kol malachas avoda loisasu. And then right after the loisasu, the next pasuk starts off with shivas yom takrivu. So we're connecting the Kol Melechas Avoda Loisasu, the first pasuk, to the Shivas Yom Takrivu to indicate that there's 7 days of Isser Malach. So that is how Rashi learns Pshat. It teaches us that Chalamoid is going to be Aser. Let's see Rashi. Limit Chalamoid, V'hachi Darish Beit. Loisasu, and then you go right into the next pasuk, Shivas Yom. This pasuk is talking about Sukkot. And this brayso is talking about the Yom of Sukkot. So that's what the Yosy Aglili said. I don't need a pasuk. I don't need this pasuk. Our favorite pasuk, it's right before Kiddush. What is the Torah referring to there? In Berishon, if it's talking about the first day of Yom Tov, it already says Shabboson. In Bishvi, it says Shabboson. So what is the Torah referring to in the pasuk of Elam Ma'ad Hashem Mikra Kodesh? It can't be telling us about Isser Malach on the first day or the last day. It must be referring to Ha'ina Kosef Medaber Ella B'Chaylo Shomayim. The Torah must be telling us that Chaylo Shomayim is also b'Malach. So we have a whole list of Mekayos in the Torah that it's also to do Malach and Chalamoid. V'lam Dechash also b'Siyas Malach. Tan Yidich, we have another brayso. Sheish Yom Teichel Matzos Uv'Yom HaShvi Atzeres L'Hashem. And we darshan Ma Shvi Atzer, just like on the 7th day, we must refrain from doing malacha. Av sheishes yamim, so too the 6 days meaning including Chalamoid, is Atzurim. Frank the Gemara, you might ask, this is the Gemara might cut. If Yom HaShvi, the seventh day of Pesach, it's Asher B'chol Malacha. Av Sheshes Yom Matzurim B'chol Malacha. All of the days of Chalamoid should also have the regular Isser Malacha of a regular Yom Tov day. Hamad Leimer, Yom HaShvi Atzeres. It says Yom HaRishon Atzeres, Yom HaShvi Atzeres. Hashvi Asher B'chol Malacha. It's only the seventh day that has a complete Isser of Malacha, like a regular Yom Tov. But the Ein Shisha Yom Matzurim B'chol Malacha. But the rest of the 6 days, they don't have all of the restrictions of a regular day Yom Tov. But the pasuk is not crystal clear as to what is mutter and what is asur. The Torah has given the power to the Chachamim to determine how to execute this halacha, how to manifest this halacha. Eze yom asur, be'eze yom mutter. Which day is asur, which day is mutter? Ezu malacha asura, be'ezu malacha muteres, and which malacha is asur and which malacha is mutter. So this is a very profound concept. So let's see how Rashi understands. Ha, harei le moshe nakasav el chacham kloimer me'achar she'amar lachakasav she'natzurin mi malacha v'loy b'chulan. Since the Torah said that they're asur in malacha, but not all malachas, v'loy pirish ezu hamuteres ve'ezu asura, and the Torah didn't tell us specifically which are mutter, which are asur, what malachas are mutter, what malachas are asur. So the Torah doesn't say specifically which days, and the Torah doesn't say specifically which malachas. Da'ur a, so you could see from here, Shalom Masran Elo lechachamim hayodim lahavin. The Torah has given over the rules of this halacha for them to understand. Ezel lahata laheter, al ezu lahapla is where to apply heter and where to apply iser. The Haim Yomi, they'll tell us Ezel Yom Tov al Kiddush Sharia. They'll also tell us which day is Yom Tov by Kiddush Sharia. And therefore, we're also b'chol malacha, and they're also in all malachas, like the first day and the last day of Pesach, they determine based on determining what is Chodesh, Shkoyach, the Ezu Chayla Shalmoid, and which day is Chalmoid, Sheine also b'chol malacha. But Chayla Shalmoid, Yagidulach, and on Chalamoid, they're going to tell us Ezu Malacha Asura, which is a davar Sheine of it, Ezu Malacha Muteres, which is a davar Ha'avid. So this is a very powerful concept that the Torah is actually telling the Chachamim to define what the Isser D'Oraisa is. Hafel of a fellow. I don't know if the Olam knows that we have a whole new electronic setup over here. We have now the same type of broadcasting that we have downstairs, we have upstairs as well. And I know Akiva worked very, very hard to put this together, and I just want to thank Akiva publicly. And I want you to know that last night, when I came back to say sure at 8 o'clock, Akiva had not yet left from Shabbos. So he didn't go home to make Abdullah till he made sure that everything was perfectly set up. So I really want to thank you. Zok Gemara umutarin behefsid v'tainis shaloi lakayim is divrei ayman atzeres achar Shabbos. The reason why, if it works out that Yom Tov was on a Shabbos or on a Friday, and they ended up bringing the karbanos on Sunday, they bedavka would do things to show that today is not really Shavuos, because the tzedakim wanted to always say that you always push it off to a Sunday. And here we were all pushing it off to a Sunday because it was Shabbos. So in order to make sure that tzedakim can say, hey, see, we were right. We do things very specifically to show that it's not Yom Tov. And one of the things we did was the Kohen Gadol didn't wear his big day kahuna. And the other thing that we learned is that you're allowed to have hesped and tainis. Normally on the Yom Tov, you're not allowed to have hesped and tainis, but here they allowed hesped and tainis to show that today is not a regular Yom Tov. We learned that hesped and tainis is not mutter. Because Maisa Umeis, who died? Oh, where's Akiva when he did? Umeis Alexa. Alexa died. Akiva, Alexa just died. Alexa died. So Alexa was the shame of a Chacham. Alexa is also the computer that we all talk to, but Alexa was also the goy that used to be Mishamish the Baal Shem Tov. So Maisa Alexa Balut, V'nichnesu Kol Yisrael L'Sayta. Everybody wanted to come to be mashpid. They wanted to make a levaya. Reb Tarfon didn't allow them to do it. And Rashi jumps in right away. Our Mishnah says you're allowed to do a hesped, and here they didn't do a hesped. Why? It was Yom. Frag the Gemara, was it really actually Shavuos day itself? Yom Tov Solka Daitach? Of course it couldn't have been Yom Tov. Even Yom Tov, Mik Asi, would they have come? Of course not. It was Yom Tevuach, meaning it was the day after Yom Tov, where they came to do their karbanos, and Tarfin didn't let them do hesped. Our mission says you're allowed to do hesped. Can be Yom Tov Shechalias Achar Shabbos. Can be Yom Tov Shechalias b'Shabbos. When did Reb Tarfon stop them from being menachem over, from making a hesped? That's when Shavuos fell out on a Monday, and they came on Tuesday. On Tuesday is a regular day where you can be washed from the carbon. Bringing karbanos on Tuesday doesn't show anything to support the tzedaikim. It's only on Sunday that shows something to support the tzedaikim. So Reb Tarfon was on a regular day. That was the day after Yom Tov. When do we say in our Mishnah? When do we say that you have to show that today is a Yom Choil? That's only the Yom Tov Shechol Yosh b'Shabbos, and they pushed it off to Sunday. That's when the tzedaikim could say, "How you see, Shavuos is on the Sunday." Akiva, I'm sorry to tell you, Alexa just died. Yeah, but not on here, the Gemara. Is it the story in the Gemara where Alexa died? I said Alexa died, I was expecting to come screaming, come panicking. Alexa died, and they didn't. Alexa died, and her tarfin didn't even let us make a hesped on Alexa. Can you imagine if Alexa died or Chol Islam? Okay, Zok Tehele Rashi. Rashi says, "B'Yom Tov Shechol Yosh b'Shabbos, Sheyom Tevuach Achar Shabbos." When Shavuos falls on Shabbos, even Beis Hillel agrees that you bring your carbon on Sunday. So on those days, it's muter b'hesped mipnei ha'ayim matzeres achar Shabbos, because it's tzedaikim who are going to prove from here that in fact the Yom Tov is the day after Shabbos. The Haida Alexa, and the story where Alexa died, and Tarfon did not allow a hesped. The Lud was Yom Tov Shechol Yosh b'Chaylu, then Yom Tevuach Shaloi Bechad b'Shabbos. That's any other day of the week where there would be no opportunity for the tzedaikim to pervert the halacha. Now we're getting to a new phase of Maseches Chagiga, and we know that there's special halachas about amaratzim who are normally tamei. They're going to be tahar. We consider them tahar on Yom Tov, so they won't be with tama wine, so that Christians will be able to sell wine on Chol Hamoed. And there's a special tahir process that was done for Yom Tov. So because we're going to be discussing Tum and Tahir related to Yom Tov, the Tanya starts discussing general rules of Tum and Tahir that are going to be relevant, that are going to impact the halachas of Yom Tov. So the first thing we have to know is that not all tumas are created equal. There's a pecking order, just like there is in every shul. So the highest level of tumah is a mace itself. A mace itself is called an avia voice tumah, a grandfather of tumah. Someone who touches a mace and becomes tummy from the mace becomes an avatumah. Something that touches an avatumah becomes a rishon tumah. Anything can become a rishon tumah. Anything, a human, anything, keli. But rishon is the end of the line for everything besides oichlun and mashkin. In other words, a human cannot become a sheni l'tumah midaraisa. A keli cannot become a sheni l'tumah midaraisa. But oichlun and mashkin, food, to become a sheni l'tumah. And the halacha is that a shlishi l'tumah is going to be puzzle if it's truma. So if you have a person that was an avatumah or a rishon that touched food, and the food became a sheni, so for chulin there's no such thing as a tumah sheni, but for truma there is. I'm sorry, for chulin there's sheni l'tumah, but not shlishi. But for truma there is. So if you have a sheni that touched a piece of food that was truma, it would puzzle the truma. But if a shlishi touched another piece of truma, that other piece of truma won't have a problem because there's no such thing as reveal tumah. But for kachim, there's even a reveal tumah. So if a shlishi tumah touched a piece of kachim, that kachim will be possible. They also made gezeres that even though a human cannot become anything less than a rishon A, and B is you don't split up a human's body. If one part of the body is tummy, the whole part is tummy. If you touch a mace with your hand, it's not just your hand that's tummy, your whole body's tummy. But they did make certain zeres only to be metama your hands, so that you should have to wash your hands before you eat bread, so that you shouldn't make it tummy by mistake. So based on these little rules, we're going to learn the Mishnah now. The halacha is you have to wash your hands in order to eat chulin, which we do. We happen to wash before we eat bread. At this point, we don't know that it's talking about bread. It might be talking about anything. The Gemara's maskana is that it's only referring to bread. Ulamaiser, and to eat maiser. And Rashi says, "Dai lahem benetila dechli." You could just use netila with a keli, like avash tepel, like we use. Shein boy ala revi yismai. But ula truma, ula kodesh, but to eat truma and to eat kodesh, matbilin. There you have to be toible your hands in the mikveh. Rashi says matbilin. Avalechal shlomim lechatas va'oshim lekayhanim. If the kahanim want to touch him, yesh maila shetzorach lehatbil yodayim barboim soil. They have to dip their hands into a mikveh. Even though they're not tummy, there's no tummy that they touched, but there's a gzera d'rabbanan that all hands are considered tummy. They didn't touch any tumah. Nevertheless, they have to be table on hands. Ulachatos, which Rashi tells us is liga b'meichatos. Mayim hamekudshem be'efer para lahazos min al tmei mesim yishmaili yisera. When you prepare this concoction of the ashes of the paraduma mixed into mayim chayim, there is an extra level of safety that the Rabbanan enacted when you want to touch that. And they said, Shem nitnu yodai ba'achas min advarim hamatamis hayasedayim v'lo yasagum. Now there is halacha midaraisa. There's no such thing as only your hands becoming tamei, but midarabanan there are things that are matama only your hands, but not your whole body. So the halacha is if someone's hands became tamei, but not his whole guf. And what's an example of what would cause that? When vlada tuma, we could go in sefer. So if someone touched a risha in the tuma, his hands become tamei midirabanan. Or if someone touches a sefer, they were goyzer tuma on svarim. So any midirabanan dekatuma on your hand, if you had that midirabanan dekatuma and you wanted to touch the water with the paraduma, then the halacha is im nitmu yadayim nitma gufa. Therefore, you'd have to toivel your whole body. Rashi says, in order to touch the waters of the paraduma, you need to go to the mikveh. All of these levels of kedusha, where each thing has a higher level of kedusha and chumrah than the level below it that the Mishnah is going to list shortly, is b'divrei tzarchim. These are all midirabanan. Midaraisa, none of these tumas exist. Why in the world are we mixing tumah with the higher here when we're in the middle of talking about Yom Tov? Because eventually we're going to run into how this impacts the Yom Tov. We treat Amaya Aretz like they're tahar, but only on Yom Tov, not during the rest of the year. The Soif Chaimer B'Kodesh, that's what we're going to discuss at the end of the Masech. So we're now getting into a whole tangent. Like my Rebbe of Mendel told us, that whenever Tahirish is remotely Negeya, since the Rabbanan didn't want to make a special Masechta in the Gemara about Tahirish because they were afraid people wouldn't learn it because it's not relevant. Now that we're in the Golas, they wanted to make sure people would learn it, so they interspersed it, they spread it around throughout the rest of Shas. That's why when we run into a little thing of Tumah Tahira, you see that the Tanoim the Gemara elaborates tremendously on it because it's trying to dilute it into the rest of Shas. So Zok to Gemara. What if somebody was tamei and then he toiveled with the intent that he wanted to eat chulin and he was Torah? So the lach is hochsuk l'chulin. He's allowed to eat chulin. But also l'maiser. So check this out. He actually toiveled and he toiveled with intent, but his intent is that he was going to eat chulin due to the tefillah. He's not allowed to eat maiser. He's not Torah enough for maiser because when he toiveled, he didn't have in zinin that he was going to eat maiser. Tovel maiser. What if he toiveled and he had in zinin that he wanted to eat maiser? The lach is huchsik l'maiser. He couldn't eat maiser. Rashi tells us the maiser that we're talking about is not maiser rishon, rather it's talking about maiser sheni. Huchsik l'maiser, osher l'truma. He's still not allowed to eat truma if he's a kohen, because when he toiveled, he didn't have in mind for truma. It's exactly the same tefillah, and he toiveled properly. But since he didn't specifically intend to toivel for truma, he can't eat truma. Tovel truma, huchsik l'truma. But osher l'kodesh, you can't eat kachim. Tovel l'kodesh, huchsik l'kodesh. But osher l'chatos, he's still not allowed to touch the water of the paraduma. Tovel l'chamor, if he tovels for something that was more severe, he tovels for kodesh or for paraduma, then muter l'kal, then he's muter to even eat chulin, of course. But of course, if you're a tovel and you had kavanah for chulin, of course you cannot do truma or meiser. What if when you were a tovel you didn't have any kavanah? And Rashi says, you jumped into the mikveh to take a swim, not because you wanted to even tire yourself. Your tefillah is no good. Zok Gemara, big day ama oretz medrash l'pusha. the clothing of an Amoritz have to be treated like they're an Avatuma. The halacha is if a Nida sits on a beged, or if a Zov sits on a beged, the beged becomes an Avatuma, and it can be Matama, a person. So the beged of an Amoritz, even though it wasn't Tameh, by default, the Rabbanan put a Tuma on it. You know why? Because maybe his wife, who was a Nida, sat on it, and he didn't notice, and he didn't care. And now, if you touch it, you're going to become Tameh. So therefore, all of the begodim of the Amoritz, we treat it like it's an Avatuma. Big day Prussian, even somebody who is a parish, meaning he's mak with his chulin with the hira, his begodim are medrash leichel truma. A kohen who eats truma, if he touches the beged of a person who's careful not to become tamei, he's careful, but he's only careful because he eats chulin with the hira, his begodim are considered tamei to the kohen. And big day leichel truma medrash lekodesh. If the kohen is someone who only eats truma but he doesn't eat kachim, and then his begodim are tamei for someone who eats kachim. Big day kodesh medrash lechatos. The same hierarchy. Yosef ben Yezer hayachasid shebekahuna. He was a chasid shebekahuna, meaning he was mamish nizar. So you would think that anybody could touch his begodim and there's no tum on them. Nevertheless, nevertheless, his shmatas, his clothing, were considered tumas medrus for somebody who ate kodesh. Yochanan ben Gudgada hayochal al taras hakodesh kol yama. Yochanan ben Gudgada was so makbid on kachim on tahira that everything he ate, he treated it with the same chaymer as kachim, meaning even chulin that was a reveal of Torah he wouldn't touch. That's how makbid he was, and still someone who wanted to touch the water of the paraduma, if they touched his beged, they wouldn't be able to. Zok the Gemara, chulin umaiser mi bo netilah shadayim. The very first words of our Mishnah says, noitlin liyadayim nechulin umaiser. Before you can eat tum and meiser, you have to wash your hands. Does chulin and meiser require netilah shadayim? Or a minu? I'll ask you from a brayso that tells you otherwise. It says that truma v'abikurim chayavun alei misa. If a zar eats them, a zar will be chayiv misa v'chaimish. And if he ate it by mistake, he has to pay back the kohen an extra chaimish, The aser lazarim, and the zar may not eat this truma nor may eat bikurim. They nichse kohen, they belong to the kohen. L'maynaf community that they belong to the kohen. The kohen can take truma, the kohen can take bikurim, and tell a woman harayat nekudeshes li the truma zeh, and it'll be a good kedushin because it's his money. It's not like it's kachim that he gets to eat, which he wouldn't be able to use for kedushin money. This is his money. And it's not bottle b'roiv, it's not bottle b'shishim, it's bottle if you have 100 times to be mavakil. But less than that, it won't be bottle. And to eat truma and bikurim, you have to wash your hands. And the harav shemesh. Let's say you were tummy, you went to the mikveh, you're not allowed to eat truma until nightfall. And that's the very first Mishnah brachas, right? Meimasai, Karin Krishma Ba'arvis, is when the Kohanim toivel to eat a truma, because that's the evening. Hare elu v'truma bikurim. These are chumras that apply to truma bikurim. Masha ein kain b'meiser. These chumras do not apply to meiser, and we're adding the choshkem b'chulin. So here, this brayso says that there's no chiyuv netila by meiser, nor is there by chulin. Yet our Mishnah says there is kasha meiser, kasha chulin achulin. Zokim or bishlam meiser lakasha. The stira in meiser, I can explain why our Mishnah says that meiser needs netila, even though the brayso says not. Because there happens to be a machlokes tanaim whether or not you have to wash your hands for mice. Harab meir harabanan. It's not we learn. Kol aton bias mayim midivrei seifin. Anything that requires bias mayim midivrei seifin metames hakodesh u'poislos hatruma. Rashi says, what does it mean? What does it mean? Kol aton bias mayim midivrei seifin. So Rashi says, kol sho torah min haTorah. I'm about halfway down in the wide lines. Anything that's midiraisa, it's Torah. The chachamim goes rule of tumah. And it's only a din tumah on it because the chachamim were geyser, and they happen to be tumah sheni. So any tumah that's a sheni l'tumah, zok the brayso, metames hakodesh will make kodesh shlishi, which can then go ahead and make a revi to pasel u'poisel as a truma. What is the difference between the word poisel and the word metama? Metama means not only as is this food possible to eat, but it can go and infect another piece. So since shlishi is the end of the line for truma, so then if a sheni touches truma, that truma becomes a shlishi, but that shlishi cannot be metama anymore truma, because shlishi is the end of the line. That's why it says u'poisel as a truma. But it says metames hakodesh, because when the piece of hektish becomes shlishi, not only can you not eat that kodesh, But if that kodesh touches another piece of kodesh, it'll make it a revi. So mitama means not only is it possible itself, it can also infect something else. But uposhel truma, you can make truma possible by making it into a shlishi. But umutter lechulin ulamaiser. It's Rashi learns umutter means it's mutter lechatchila to eat chulin ulamaiser without any restriction. Rashi is umutter lechal chulin, to mutter to eat chulin. It doesn't say it doesn't possible. It says lechatchila. The mutter afilu mashma. It's mashma that even if you're ashamed of the tuma, lechatchila, you're allowed to go and eat chulin maiser, which is a direct contradiction to our Mishnah, but that's the svar of Rebbe. So I have a simple answer to the kasha. The brayso that says that you don't have to wash for meiser is going according to Reb Meir. Our Mishnah that says you have to wash your hands for meiser is going according to the chacham. Kasha. Where in the world do you find anybody who holds that you have to wash your hands for chulin? Who does our Mishnah that says you have to wash your hands for chulin? Who does our Mishnah hold by? Our Mishnah that says you have to wash your hands for chulin is speaking if you want to eat chulin. The brayso that says that you don't have to wash your hands for chulin, that's to touch chulin. You're allowed to touch chulin, and you won't be metamet. But if you want to eat chulin, you have to wash your hands, which is what we do. Where do you have a machlokes Rabbanan and Meir as to whether or not you have to wash your hands for meiser, ella b'achila de meiser? The machlokes is only by achila. Abo b'negia de meiser, but to touch meiser u'achila de chulin loy pligi. Everybody agrees that you don't have to wash your hands even to eat chulin. So if that's the case, once again, what's pshat in our Mishnah that says that to eat chulin you do have to wash your hands? It seems like everybody agrees that you do not have to wash your hands to eat chulin. So both are speaking by achila. Our Mishnah that says you have to wash your hands is speaking by achila, and the brayso that says you don't have to wash your hands is speaking by achila. But it depends on what you eat. Well, like kasha, kan by achila de nahama. Our Mishnah is speaking about eating bread where you're mechuyev to wash your hands, and the brayso is speaking kan by achila de peri. When you eat peri some chulin, you don't have to wash your hands. If someone washes his hands to eat pears, that would be called a shoah. That is a little bit over the top. Tanarabban, we learned. If someone washed his hands, nischaven, if he had kavana to be matayr his hands, yodav tires, then his hands are tahor. Lo nischaven, yodav tmeos, then his hands remain to be tamei. The same thing is if you toivel your hands at mikveh, nischaven, if you had kavana to be matayr them, yodav tahor. Lo nischaven, if you didn't have kavana, then yodav tmeos. Practically more about Tanya bein nischaven bein lo nischaven yodav tires. We had a brayso that says it doesn't make a difference. You don't have to have kavanah. When you toivel your hands, you're going to be Torah regardless. Or when you wash your hands, they'll be Torah regardless. Rab Nachman lo kasha, it's not shver. Kan lechulin and kan lemeiser. For chulin, you don't have to have kavanah. But for meiser, you need kavanah. And we'll stop here, Mitzvah, and we will be mamshech tomorrow. Shkoyach, everybody, have a wonderful, wonderful day.
The sponsor for today's year.
The sponsor for today's year is
Nishmas's grandmother.
who's sponsoring it?
Today's broadcast sponsored by Betsy Bench, Nishmas's grandmother.
Betsy Bench is sponsoring this broadcast to Lila Nishmas's grandmother. Shadel Bas Moshe Yoina Halevi Klein, whose baby emerged today, Chavav. For Neshama should have an Aliyah, and all Eden should have a big Yeshua, it should be a male Yosher for the whole family. And for Klal Yisrael.
Amen.
Okay, have a good day.